Hello, this is Al Judge. Welcome to another lesson from my book, From Photos to Art with Photoshop. In this lesson, we're going to be talking about adjustment layers, and we're going to go through the whole list one by one and discuss them. Some we'll talk about in more detail than others, but at least we'll touch on each one of them. You have a variety of adjustment layers, and the bottom line on all these adjustment layers is you're modifying the histogram in order to create a more compelling effect in your image. So let's get started. We can access the adjustment layer several ways. One is we can start down here with this fill and adjustment layer icon. If we do, we see the whole list of adjustment layers here. The other way that we can get to it is we can come up to Layers, New Adjustment Layer, and come down the list. And I'm going to use this as just a larger menu and maybe easier to see for you. So we have 4 in the first group, and these have to do with tone and contrast. And then we have 7 more that have to do with color. And we have a sort of a potpourri kind of a thing here. We have 5 more that don't have a common theme, but they all do something unique. So we have a total of 16 adjustment layers. And I'm going to start with this first one, brightness and contrast. Another thing, often when you're editing photos, this is a place you might want to start. You'd like to get your tone and contrast locked in before you start working with your colors. Let's start with brightness and contrast. Photoshop's going to name that layer for you. It's going to call it brightness and contrast. And I'm just going to say OK. Notice it's placed it above the background layer. It will always place an adjustment layer above the last layer that was highlighted. So in this case, there was only one layer, the background layer, and it placed it above that. Okay, in this image, we have summer storm, and we have a good bit of light on this rock formation, and we have some dark clouds, but it doesn't really pop. What we want to do is we want to increase the contrast between the two, and we want to increase the brightness. And we want to play around with this a bit. And we can go and take a look at how well we're doing. I think you can see that pops quite a bit when we do that. We give more detail to the clouds and to the foreground. Now that might be a little too bright. I'm going to crank that down just a little. You can see as we increase the contrast, the clouds in the background are going to get darker. And more of the foreboding, ominous feeling of a summer storm. And I'm going to actually bring that brightness down a bit. Brightness is not the same thing as exposure. If we were adjusting the exposure, the entire image would get darker or lighter. Brightness tends to affect the areas that are already bright. It's sort of like turning on an internal light. It can really make something pop. So let's just take a quick look at what we've done to this image with just this one simple adjustment layer. You can see that's kind of flat, and now we can really see a distinction between the foreground and the dark clouds in the background. Close that one out. We're going to go back to an image we worked with earlier in our introduction. I'm going to turn off our rulers for now. We're not going to need them in this example. And I'm going to apply this levels adjustment layer to this image. And as we do, like I mentioned before, all the adjustment layers are modifying the histogram. But this particular one, you actually see the histogram when you're working with it. So this is a histogram for this image. Pure black is all the way on the left, pure white is all the way on the right. You can see we have a fair amount of data to the dark side, and we also have a large gap here where we don't have much data at all on the white side. So levels is going to allow us to modify that, and in modifying it, we're going to increase the contrast in the picture. So I'm just going to start with this slider on the right side, which is going to change the point in the histogram. So I'm going to move that in, and as I do, you can see the image getting lighter. Likewise, I'm going to come from the dark side, and I'm going to move that in a little. It's a little darker, and we have a balance point here in the middle that we can also play with. We can make it a little brighter by moving it to the left, a little darker by moving it to the right, and we can just kind of play around with it to get the maximum contrast and definition in this image. Now I'm going to go back and I'm going to set these as they originally were. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to hold down my Alt key, which would be the Option key on a Mac. And when I grab this slider on the right side under the histogram, my image is going to turn totally black. And as I start moving toward the middle, I'll start getting just a little bit of detail. You can see it down near the bottom of the screen. And as I move in, you'll see more and more detail coming in. And a lot of people will tell you stop right here. As soon as you start to see that detail, you've gone far enough. So I would stop there. I can do the same thing on the left. I hold down the Alt key. This time, when I click on that slider, it turns white. And as I start moving in, you can see I'm starting to see some black specks on my image. I'm going to stop right there. Now what that's doing, it's sort of cropping the histogram and redistributing the data over a smaller range. So you get more definition here. And like I said, we can also move this balance point. Okay, now this is our levels adjustment. If we were going to add more adjustments, we might want to change these again. And that's another nice thing about adjustment layers. You can always go back and modify them later. But right for now, considering this is the only adjustment layer we're using on this image, I'm going to leave it right there. And we can see the difference we made with that adjustment. Again, it has more contrast and definition in the image. I can come into this one again, and we can, like I say, we can further modify it if we want. And I personally like to pull that in a little further. I like to come to that inflection point. Now, I came back here because I wanted to show you these things. We have 3 eyedroppers on the side here. We have black, gray, and white. And this is a way to set the white balance on your image if you didn't quite get it right in your camera. So if you have either a spot where you know it's perfectly black, a spot that is a neutral gray, or a spot that's white, pure white, you can use that to reset your white balance. So we have snow on the roof here in a few places. That's pretty white, so I'm going to grab the white eyedropper and I'm just going to sample that roof. And when I do, you can see there was a change in the image and in the histogram. Our next adjustment layer is called curves. Now we're going to add that. Similar to when we had levels, we can see the histogram, and we also have the 2 sliders under here. And in fact, these do exactly the same thing as the levels adjustment. But the other thing we have is we have a diagonal line coming down across the image, and that's the starting point here. and we're going to manipulate that line, and that's where the name curves come from. We'll get to that in a minute, but first I'm going to set the levels just like we did with the levels adjustment. I'm going to bring that in. I'm going to bring this over. So you can see that diagonal line has shifted. This is the original position, the faint line, and this is the new position now. The main thing with curves, again, remember the right side is white, the left side is black. We're on this side. In general, if you place your cursor on the curve and you grab it, you can move it. And if you move up, you generally will get lighter. If you move down, you generally will get darker. Now, usually the most effective or appealing curve is an S curve. So we want to bring that up a little here and down this end. We like to bring it down a little. This is going to maximize contrast. Sometimes we want to move it in the middle. We can move it either way while we watch our image. I'm going to move this a little off to the side so we can see better what we're doing. But you can grab this in as many places as you like, and you can move it around. Create a curve. Now the other thing we can do is we have an icon up here. If we click on it, we can then go into the image, and as I have my eyedropper over a specific spot, you'll see a circle on the curve, and that's telling you exactly where that shade is. Now I'm going to go to the snow, and it should be very much to the right. There it is. We're at the right end of the curve. I'm going to go into these shadows, some of the really dark areas, and you'll see we're at the left end of the curve. Okay, now the other thing you can do is you can actually grab in here, and you can move up and down, watch your image change, and as you're doing that, the curve is going to change also. Okay, grab another point, do a similar thing. And you can end up with a very complex curve this way. Now you could also do it over here. You can do the same thing. As I said, you can grab it in many places as you like. You can start to get some very surreal kind of effects, as you can see here, as you begin playing around with more and more points. Anytime you move a point, it's going to try and maintain a smooth curve, so it's going to get, you're not going to just move that one particular area that you're fooling with, but you're going to change all the data around it. So this is the essence of the curves adjustment. There are people who use this as their primary editing tool, and they're very good at it, but it takes a long time to learn how to use curves effectively and a lot of practice. And with all the other tools we have in Photoshop and the different type of adjustment layers, many people never fool with the curves at all. So you can decide for yourself if it's worth playing with. Just go in sometime and take an image and see what happens as you start moving these things around. I'm going to close this out. Let's go to the next one on the list. Exposure. And this one's pretty self-explanatory. And basically you can lighten or darken. And as you can see, you don't have to move it too far to have an effect. Gamma tends to control the midtones, so you can do some things there. And we also have the 3 eyedroppers. We can grab this white and reset the white balance. can also play around with this offset. Which again, all these are fairly sensitive. You don't have to move them very far at all to get a significant difference in your image. Okay, let's go to another adjustment layer. Come down here. Do Vibrance. Vibrance is a bit different than saturation. Vibrance tends to make the dull colors more vibrant, more saturated, and the very saturated colors less saturated. It just tends to give more life to your image. Or saturation will increase the color saturation of everything. So there we have Vibrance. Okay, I'm going to turn off some of these layers. In fact, I'll turn them all off. Go to our next adjustment layer. And this is Hue Saturation. So we have two different places where we can affect the saturation. Two different adjustment layers. And this one, we also have the capability of picking a particular color channel or color. We can work with just the blues, just the reds. We have red rocks here, so let's just pick red. And now when we adjust the saturation, we should see a dramatic difference in those rocks. And you can see if I go far enough, we really do. Just back off a little, but as you can see, we're just affecting the reds. And we can also affect the lightness in those, or the darkness. And we can affect the hue somewhat. But right now we're just working on red. We can do any of these other colors. Or we can just stick to the master, which covers everything. So if I move the saturation now, it's not just red, it's saturating all the colors. And you can see that changing. So that's our hue and saturation. Our next adjustment layer, which is color balance. Okay, and we can affect shadows, midtones, or highlights. So let's go to shadows in this image. And see what happens when we work on the yellow. You can see you can get some very odd effects here. It can look like old film. But you have a lot of possibilities with what you can do. And here's another case where it might just be worthwhile to play with some of these adjustments sometime. And just learn by using them. Now I'm going to go to highlights, which our snow should be part of those highlights. And we'll take a look at what happens when we move these sliders. We can get some pretty dramatic effects and shift in colors. But we're working with individual channels. Okay, we're going to go to the next adjustment layer. Black and white. Now this is going to convert our image to black and white. I'm just going to turn off these other two layers. Now, all the sliders are colors, but as you begin working with this, you'll learn that certain colors have a dramatic effect upon the image. So I'm going to take this yellow and I'm going to move it. We're not seeing a whole lot until we start going down on the yellow. Let's do the red. You can see it really brightens up some when I go to the right. Greens. See, cyan really had an effect here. The bottom line here is that you can have a dramatic effect on a black and white image by modifying the colors that were in the original image. And as you continue working with this, is another thing where you will begin to learn which sliders have the greatest impact on different kinds of images. I know that generally when we're working with portraits and we go to black and white, the yellow slider has quite a bit of an effect on how that image is going to look. In landscapes, it's not as dramatic. So again, with whatever type of images you're usually shooting, you will quickly learn which of these sliders is going to have the greatest effect if you want to convert it to black and white. Okay, our next adjustment layer is photo filter. Now I'm going to close that black and white. In film photography, one of the ways to get a warming or a cooling effect in an image was to add a filter over the lens as you were taking your images. So this gives us the opportunity to simulate that. So right now I have a warming filter on here, and with the drop-down menu I can pick other filters. I can do a cooling filter, which should give this more of a bluish tint, which it really did dramatically. And I can also affect how strong that effect is. I can use this density slider to control the strength of that filter. So as you can see, I have quite a few filters here. Can get different effects. And this can be very subtle at times or very dramatic, however you want to use it. Close that out. Close that layer. Next layer adjustment is channel mixer. Okay, the channel mixer is similar to the black and white filter that we used, or the black and white adjustment layer that we used, but it just uses sliders for the primary colors rather than the range of sliders that we had in the black and white. And if you're wondering why this isn't black and white, it's because we haven't picked our preset yet. So you have a bunch of different presets for this, and I'm going to do a black and white with a red filter. So I have a black and white image as if I had taken it with a red filter. I can now adjust various characteristics of this image into channels individually. So anyway, it's another way to adjust black and white images. And as I said, there are a wide variety of presets that I can choose from and as my starting point, and then just modify that as I choose. Our next adjustment layer is color lookup. Now this is a very interesting, I'm going to turn off that last adjustment layer. This is a very interesting one. You can spend quite a bit of time here looking at all your possibilities. But you have some drop-down menus here, and you can see all kinds of different effects. And this one down here, for example, says night from day. So I'm taking this as a daylight image, and if I click on that, it's going to change it to look like it was taken at night. Now again, we probably want to do some adjustment there to fine tune it, but you can see the general effect. I can also, it'll also simulate some film types. Foggy night, being a little different than the last night from day. Candlelight, it's a much softer light. So we have a whole bunch there. We can go to abstract, and we can pick again different presets, get different effects. As you can see, this is very abstract. Some are not so much so. This has a sepia look to it. Color negative. So that's what that image would look like if we looked at the negative of color film. So anyway, we can apply some rather unique filters to these, to any image, using any of these presets. And a lot of them, like I say, they simulate old film types and different situations. This crisp winter day, that blue really brings out the coldness. Fall colors would make it much richer and warmer. So again, this is another one of those where you can just come in here and play around and see what you like. Okay, let's move on. We have another adjustment layer. This is called invert. And it basically is converting the image to a negative. If it were film, it would be your film negative. I'm going to close that. Turn that off. Layer, next adjustment layer, posterize. Well, this one makes your image look like a poster. That's so the name is pretty aptly described. And the only adjustment you have here is how much of that effect you want to impart to your image. So I come down all the way to the left, I get the maximum effect. And this will vary from image to image as to how much poster effect you get. So we'll close that one. The next adjustment layer is threshold. And this one, we can adjust the slider here and we can create a layer mask if we choose. This is a rather advanced topic and technique, but basically you can use this threshold function, adjustment layer, to fine-tune colors and to separate shadows from highlights. So again, this is beyond the scope of anything we're going to talk about in the book, but you should know it exists. I'm going to turn some things off here. And we're getting close to the end of our list. We have a gradient map. And this sort of looks like an infrared image. Again, this is a topic that's beyond the scope of the book. We're not going to get into it, but basically what it's doing is it's replacing the gradient that's used in with the histogram for the image with a different gradient. And we can come in here and we can do that and get another very abstract kind of image. We can pick another gradient, get some very strange effects, and you can do all kinds of things with it. So again, this is something you may want to play with on your own, but it is beyond the scope of the book, and so we're not going to spend any more time on it. We'll come down to our final adjustment layer, and it's called selective color. In this case, the explanation is so complex and detailed that I'm not even going to attempt it. Just you should know that it does exist. If you have an interest and a curiosity, this is something you may want to investigate yourself. But it's not used very often. It's very advanced, and we're not going to spend time with it. So I'm going to close this out. So we have been through all the adjustment layers. The first group is the ones you use the most often. The second group, the ones at the top, are the ones you use the most often to affect your color. As you move down the list, these will be used less and less. The final group is generally for very specific applications, and not many people are going to have a need for these things. So, and if you know the first 6, you've got a pretty good handle on adjustment layers. So we're going to now do an example using adjustment layers. Okay, we did this as an example in the introductory video, but I'm going to do it again. Seeing it a second time, it might help commit it to your memory better. So we're going to use the quick select tool. I'm going to leave this at 11. The last time we did this example, I had a larger brush size, but this time I'm going to leave it small so we can see if it makes any difference to us. And a reminder, we're using the quick selection tool. The quick selection tool basically is looking for edges. It is a brush tool, and as you drag, it's going to spread out and look for the edges. It's a great tool to use with isolating flowers because you usually have a very distinctive edge that separates the flower from its background. And this is certainly the case here. Now, the reason we're looking at this is it's a good example for our adjustment layers because it looks like a very dull image, but the fact is it was taken in shade early in the morning and the camera captured an enormous amount of color data. It's just that to the human eye it's not obvious at this point. Okay, so again we're going to start by just selecting this flower. So I'm going to come up here to this tip, and I'm just going to draw a line straight down to the opposite side. And you see as I did that, it spread out, it caught the edges, did a pretty good job. We're going to come in here, we're going to zoom in, because here's an area that we did miss. It does it quickly, it doesn't do it precisely. So I'm going to come back to the quick selection tool, and we have add to selection, subtract from selection, so we can really fine tune this thing. So I'm going to do add to selection, and I'm going to grab this little tip down here, and I'm going to pull up, and it included more of the flower this time. Now I'm going to do subtract from selection, and you can see there's a gap here. We never got it all. We also have a little area in here that should be subtracted from the selection. And I'm just going to put my cursor there and click. Didn't get it all, try it again. There it is. Likewise, we have a little spot up here we can click on, and we have an area here that we can modify. Okay, I'm going to look around the edges of this flower, see if we have other things, and yes we do. We have a petal here that we didn't pick up, so I'm going to add to selection. Again, just come from the tip and move toward the body of the flower. And we did get a little more than we bargained for. We have another piece that needs to come out here, and I'll take subtract from selection and refine that. Okay, and here we should have a little more coming out of there. Great. Now we'll come up and look around the edges. This looks pretty good so far. Did miss a little point here. We will add to selection by placing our cursor there and clicking. Okay, things look pretty good. Come around. We have a little area here that we need to subtract from selection. So I'll come in there, click and drag. And just touch that up a bit. So as we come around, we look at the edges. Okay, we have one more little spot here. We have a pretty good selection. So I'm going to come down here, click on the zoom tool, fit screen, and now we have the flower selected. And as you can see, it didn't take very long to do that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here and do layer, new layer, layer via copy. And I'm going to turn off that background. So now we have the flower on a transparent background. I'm going to add in a solid fill, and I'm going to choose black. And I have found over the years that, particularly with flowers, a nice black background works very well. This particular image looks extremely well when printed on aluminum and with the black background. And it really pops out. It almost looks like it's backlit. Now, you may find that a little hard to believe because it's kind of dull right now. But with a few adjustment layers, we're going to change all that. So I'm going to come up here, start with brightness and contrast. I'm going to increase my contrast. Okay, now we're not seeing anything happen. It's because the brightness and contrast layer was added above the fill layer, and we really want it above the flower layer. So we moved it in the stack. And now, when we move, let's, I'm going to make this a little smaller so we can see better. When I move the contrast, we'll see something happening here. And when we touch the brightness, we'll really see a difference. Like I said, it's almost like an internal light, really brightening up that image. And play with the contrast a little more. Okay, we're going to leave that layer as it is for the time being. We're going to add another layer. Levels. Now, when we're looking at this histogram, we can see this large black, this line here for the black, pure black line, and that's picking up this black background, and it's sort of skewing the entire histogram. So I'm going to turn off that black background for now, and you'll see that the histogram changed, and I'll turn it back on if you missed that. If I turn it off, the histogram changes, and we're going to come in from the sides like we did before, and we're going to be losing a little bit of data here, and if we want to see how much, we can just hold down the Alt key and click. You can see here coming from the right side that we're really not affecting this yet. We're just now beginning to affect it. We have a little bit of color coming in up toward the top and a few little specks in other places. We'll hold down that Alt again and we'll click on, we'll work on this side, and you can see there's some details starting to come in. So we probably don't want to go that far, but we'll come this far. And we'll lose that amount of image data on that side, and we'll lose that amount on that side, which is really negligible. So we've reconfigured the histogram, and we can change our midpoint if we like. And that seems to pop a little more. So we now have 2 adjustment layers, and we're going to come in with the third one. We're going to add some vibrance here. And sometimes I like to go all the way to the end just to see what's going to happen. And then back off a bit. So this might be a pretty good point. We're going to add our black layer again so we get some real contrast and we can see what we're doing. And we're getting some real life into this image. But it's not as sharp as I would like. So I'm going to come here to this layer that has only the flower on it, and I'm going to duplicate that layer by dragging down here. And now we have a copy of it. And for this layer that we just created, I'm going to filter, Other, High Pass. When we do, we get sort of a gray image with some detail showing. Right now we're sitting at 5.4 pixels, and as we increase that number, we'll see more and more detail. Now the fact is we don't really want that much detail. We really want somewhere down around 5 or 6 pixels. But what we want to do is emphasize the edges of this detail. So I'm going to go 7 pixels this time. When I did the example in the first video, I did around 5. I'm going to go about 7 this time. I'm going to click on that. And as you can see, we still have this gray layer obscuring the flower. If I turn that off, you can see the flower underneath. But now I'm going to use a blend mode, which we've talked about before. And the particular one I'm going to use is overlay. And when I do, you can see this is a much crisper image. I can turn it on and off and you'll see the difference. You see those water drops really showing up. And the other details of the flower itself. Another blend mode that works very well is soft light. And we may see a little difference. We may not notice the difference. Yeah, that's not quite as sharp. So I want to go back to overlay. Okay, and there we have a pretty sharp image there. So in a matter of a few minutes, we took a very dull image that didn't seem to have a whole lot of life to it, and we brought it to life, and we placed it on a black background, and we have 3 adjustment layers. Now, any of these layers we can come back and fine-tune. Now that we have all 3 active, we can fine-tune and maybe decide we want a little more contrast or we want a little less. Actually, it's looking like a little more is maybe not a bad idea. And we can do that with each of these adjustment layers. We can constantly go back and change until we feel like we've really optimized this image. So this concludes our discussion of adjustment layers, and I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it was helpful and you'll be able to put it to good use immediately. I'll see you in the next video.